We've just finished casting on our 90 stitches, and we have a whole bunch of yarn left over on the tail end that we're going to trim so it doesn't get in our way. This is the yarn ball strand, the working yarn. Make sure we trim the right one. We don't want to trim the working yarn. So we want to leave a long enough tail that we can weave it in later. So we'll cut it to about maybe 6 inches. And now we're ready to start actually knitting. We're going to put the end that's still connected to our yarn on our dominant hand side. We'll lay the needles in a circle, and we want to make sure that the stitches aren't twisted around the needle like they are here. So lay our knitting flat and then just rotate all our stitches so that the little edge with the bump is pointing toward the middle, just like that. We should be able to see that there are no twists. Now we join in the round. To join in the round, we will take a stitch marker and place it on the needle. We're going to pick up the end that has the yarn attached. This is our working needle, and place our marker on the needle just like that. This marks where our round starts and ends. We're ready for our first stitch. We'll pick up the other needle with our other hand. We want to make sure nothing gets twisted. This is the needle that moves, and this is the one that holds the stitches. So we'll poke our working needle into that first stitch. We're going in from front of the stitch to behind. For left-handed knitters, it's from right to left. Pick up the working yarn. We want to make sure we don't get the tail. That's why we cut it short. Now take the working yarn and wrap it around the working needle, which is poking through to the back. And draw that loop back through the stitch to the front. Just like that. This is the hard part when we're getting started, but keeping those stitches nice and loose will make it a lot easier. Now, if this stitch is really tight, it's going to be hard to draw that loop through. So if it's tight, try loosening it up a little bit before we start. We'll just poke our needle in there and stretch out that stitch. So we'll poke our needle in. This is called knitwise. It's the direction that we go when we're working a knit stitch. Wrap the yarn around from bottom to top in between the needles. Draw the loop through to the front. We'll just slide this stitch off the holding needle. We're just going to let it drop off. And now we've worked one stitch from the holding needle onto our working needle. Now again, I'm going to insert my working needle into the stitch from front to back, wrap the yarn around, draw the loop through to the front. It helps sometimes to push these stitches gently onto the holding needle. Just helps the stitches move a little easier. You want to avoid pushing off with your finger. It will hurt your finger over time. When we hold the yarn in our dominant hand, like I'm doing, this is called English style knitting. Also called throwing, because we're throwing the yarn around like cowboys in the Wild West. Now notice this stitch is on the tip of my needle, and it's going to end up tight, if I don't slide it onto the main part of my needle. So we just want to make sure that as we're knitting, we're sliding those stitches back onto the widest part of the needle so they stay nice and loose. Now you'll notice I'm just dropping the yarn in between each stitch, but you can keep holding it in your dominant hand, and I'll show you another way to hold it in a moment. Wrap the yarn around, draw the loop through to the front. Now the reason I can do that so easily is that these stitches on my holding needle are nice and loose. We're not pulling the yarn really tight when we draw it through. Now we can see that we've got all these nested little V's in our work. And each one of those V's is a knit stitch. This is our first one, our cast on, and then we'll just have a whole bunch of nested little V's going up in a column as we work. Let's talk about different ways we can hold the yarn. When starting, it's probably easiest to just let it go each time, like we've been doing. Many knitters hold it in their dominant hand. Again, this is called English or throwing. Another way we can hold the yarn, and the way I personally hold the yarn, is in our non-dominant hand. It's called continental style, also called picking, because you're picking up the yarn with your needle. To do that, we're going to do exactly the same thing, but the mechanics look a little different. Poke the needle through. Now when we wrap the yarn around, we're still wrapping below to above, but we kind of pick up the yarn with our needle. We poke it into the stitch, wrap the yarn around, draw it through. Now notice that we kind of draw the needle down as we're drawing it through. That lets me get the narrower part of the needle through the stitch. Just make sure to slide it back onto the widest part of the needle at the end. And again, we're not putting a lot of tension on the yarn. Now, we're going to knit all the way back around to our marker. Okay, that's our last stitch. We can just pull that little tail to tighten everything up. Now we're going to slip our marker. We're just going to move the marker from our holding needle to our working needle. And that's it. We're going to practice this knit stitch a lot. Keep knitting about 42 more rounds or until the cowl is about 9 inches tall when measured from our cast on round. But before we get there, you'll need to join a new ball of yarn if you're using our kit. Here's how. I have this much yarn left, so we'll need to join the second ball of yarn. This is our old yarn, and here's our new yarn. We'll lay them out like this so that we have this overlap, and our tails are pointing in opposite directions. And let's actually adjust this so that it overlaps further back, and we can now start knitting with it. We'll hold the two yarns together, and now we'll knit with 2 yarns instead of 1. We're just making sure this tail stays out of the way, and we'll knit about 3 stitches or so with the 2 yarns. That will secure our yarn and make sure that neither end pulls out. Now we'll set down the old yarn and just continue knitting with the new yarn. That's called a join. We've joined the new ball of working yarn. We've just arrived back to where the join is, and we can find that pretty easily because we've got all this yarn behind our work. Now, when we work these stitches, we're going to work both loops as if they're one stitch. We can see, and they might get a little loose because that tail is just right there, but just gently pull that tail to snug it up a little and knit those 3 stitches as if they're one stitch, just like that. And what we will see is that it's a pretty invisible join. We can see this stitch a little, and again, we can just gently tug that tail and it pulls that stitch right in, and now we can barely even tell.